Okay, good evening, everyone. I make that 6 o'clock.
Okay.
So, Mark, are you happy to do the introduction?
Yeah, we'll start the stream now, Chair, Acting Chair, and we'll do the housekeeping as well. And I'll hand over to you then.
Thank you.
Right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee on Monday, the 23rd of February at 6 p.m. My name's Mark Thomas. I'm the Democratic Services Officer for tonight's meeting. I'm just going to run through some housekeeping rules, and then I will hand over to the Vice Chair, who will be Acting Chair for tonight's meeting. May I remind everyone present that this hybrid meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback whenever participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please raise their hand in the chamber or by using the remote raise hand function? If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak by the chair, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address the committee by the chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they have been seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of the Chair and/or Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. Chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and/or to grab the attention of the Chair or Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they address the committee, then they should let the Chair or Democratic Officer know. I'd like to welcome all committee and non-committee elected members, co-opted representatives, officers, Vale residents, and anyone else watching the meeting broadcast. I'll now hand over to the Acting Chair for tonight's meeting, Nigel Ireland.
Thank you, Mark, for that introduction. So the first item on the agenda today, welcome everyone, is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Mark?
Yes, we do, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Ball and from Gareth Chapman, the Chair of the committee.
Okay, great, thank you. Item 2 on the agenda then is the minutes of the meeting, the last meeting, which was on the 15th of December 2025. So if I can just ask, first of all, for just any queries over accuracy of the minutes, or are we happy to approve those, please? Any comments or queries? Councillor Hooper? Sorry, Councillor Hooper, I can't actually hear you.
You're muted, Councillor.
Not anymore. Just accept the minutes, please, Nigel.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. That's great. Thank
sorry,
you.
Chair. It's just been seconded by Councillor Goodjohn as well, the minutes for approval.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, and then on to item 3 then, declarations of interests. Any to declare for this meeting? I'm not seeing any hands going up. I'm assuming I can't see in the chamber, Mark, so if you can just let me know if there's anything in the chamber.
No, there's no comments from the chamber either on that, Chair.
Great, thank you. So on to the first sort of main item on the agenda then, agenda item 4, which is a reference from Cabinet regarding school balances. Who's going to be taking this one, please? Hi, Elizabeth.
Noswaith. Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I'd like to start off by giving an overview, and I'd like to bring in others to contribute to this agenda item, and that will be Samantha Clemens from Audit Wales, as well as Tom Bowring, to take you through then our response to the audit findings. So the purpose of this is obviously to provide members with the findings of the Auditor General for Wales's review on school deficits. Now, the Audit Wales review considered the effectiveness of the Council's arrangements to support and challenge its schools to recover from their budget deficit positions. And you'll see in the pack that you have detailed information about the scope and the key findings of the review. Now, the review was undertaken to help fulfil the Auditor General's duties under Section 17 of the Public Audit Wales Act 2004. And this is really so that it can satisfy that accounts are prepared according to regulations, that proper accounting practices have been followed, and that the local authority has adequate arrangements for securing the efficiency and effectiveness in managing public money. Now, the review findings concluded that a quarter of schools in deficit at that time had not submitted recovery plans. And although the Council was taking a range of actions to support and challenge schools to recover from their deficits, it had not yet resulted in reducing overspends. And it was found that there were shortcomings in the Council's reporting of this significant risk, meaning that it was limiting the effectiveness of monitoring and challenge from committees. 3 recommendations were made in relation to the review, and again you'll find that those are detailed in the paperwork included. So, in essence, these focus on the Council improving oversight of the impact of its actions to aid assessment of value of money, strengthening support and challenge, and learning from approaches that other councils have taken to address school deficits. You'll see also that we have provided information for you on our response to the Audit Wales finding, as well as an action plan and the proposed new corporate risk on schools' deficits. Now, what I'd like to do at this moment in time is to hand over to Samantha Clements, who was the audit lead at the time, so that she can give you a breakdown of the findings of the audit review. Sam, are you with us at this moment in time?
Yes, thank you, Liz. I'll try not to duplicate what's already been said, but basically this review focused on whether the Council has arrangements to support and challenge its schools to recover from their budget deficit positions. And just to say what we didn't look at arrangements in schools, we didn't speak to head teachers, and nor did we speak with governors. This was a high-level review. It formed part of our assurance and risk assessment work for our 25 work programme. And it came about simply because it was identified as a risk in an ESTIN inspection report. And the ESTIN inspection fieldwork actually took place in February 2024. So since then, across Wales, everybody understands the overall level of school balances has declined sharply. So it is recognised as a national issue, and as such, ESTIN have actually surveyed all councils across Wales on this matter, and they are expected to report on this in March. So we're very interested to understand those findings. So not to delve too much on the detail and the data, just to say that our fieldwork constituted interviews with key officers, a review of documents and data, and this took place between October 2024 and August 2025. We found that the Council is supporting and challenging its schools to address their deficits, but some of these activities at the time were in their very early stages of implementation and therefore not having the desired impact on school recovery. We found that many schools in deficit either didn't have recovery plans, or the plans that they had prepared we felt were not sufficiently robust. So this then raised concerns for us about how schools were intended to achieve the step change needed to become financially sustainable and avoid negative impacts on the council's overall financial sustainability. We also found shortcomings in the council's reporting of the significance of the risk, which we felt limited the effectiveness of monitoring and the opportunity to challenge in public committees. So this gave rise to 3 recommendations, in summary around greater oversight of the impact of council's actions on school recovery, the need for robust support and challenge of schools' recovery, and that was including the reporting of that significant risk. And then finally, learning from the approaches adopted by other councils in Wales, since this is now recognised as an issue across Wales. And then, as Liz said, we asked the council to complete a management response form where we summarised our recommendations, and the council then disclosed the actions that they intended to take to respond to our recommendations, and we thought that those actions adequately responded. So that's all I was proposing to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. Tom, would you mind if I asked you to take through our response now so that we can provide committee with a bit more detail, please? Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Liz, and thank you, Sam, as well. So I think important to say that the timing of this piece of work was really useful. As Sam has said, it was at the early stages of developing the response to the situation, and a thank you to the audit team for the work that was iterative in terms of the feedback throughout that audit. Members of the committee will see the management response form appended to your papers this evening. Cabinet have approved these recommendations. They've approved the response to the recommendations made by Audit Wales and have referred them to the Startwell Committee for their consideration, as well as Governance and Audit Committee in your role as overseeing regulatory report recommendations. The Council's response is to accept the recommendations that have been made by Audit Wales. They are useful recommendations that many of which we've been able to respond to already, including strengthening some of the oversight. Members will note that a new corporate risk is proposed to be included in the register this evening on later item on your agenda. There's greater levels of oversight in terms of our monitoring, and members will also note that some of the reports on the Council's revenue budget have been amended so that they're giving greater clarity and visibility to the issues. Council's proceeded to follow the process that was set out with the schools that were of most concern, and they've been proactive in their response. And we are seeing that the combined efforts that ourselves within the local authority and the schools are having is beginning to demonstrate some good progress. There's still lots of work to do so that the actions that are set out in our response will continue for the foreseeable future. And Liz mentioned the learning from other local authorities. I'm pleased to say to members that a working group with neighbouring authorities is now in place. We've also strengthened the level of support that is being offered to schools both at secondary and primary level. And Liz, in her role as Director of Learning and Skills, continues to work at a national level to understand and learn from colleagues elsewhere. Wanted to flag to members of the committee the considerations from the Startwell Scrutiny Committee. So that committee noted the report and recommendations when they considered this recently. They've asked for comments related to the discussion to be sent to Cabinet for consideration regarding the importance of safeguarding the wellbeing of head teachers and school staff, concerns around potential recruitment and retention issues relating to staff burnout, leadership sustainability and high expectations, the pressure caused by additional learning needs demands, staffing needs and curriculum requirements should be emphasised to the Cabinet. A concern that schools were being pushed beyond capacity, problems with systemic, the problems were systemic across Wales and not Vale specific, but the Vale data showed large variations between schools with similar contexts and the need for consistent practice across the local authority. So that's what the committee asked for Cabinet to consider. The views of your committee this evening, acting chair and members, will be sent to Cabinet alongside that of the scrutiny committee as well. So that gives an overview of the management response.
Thank you, Tom. So just to conclude really, in line with the Council's performance monitoring arrangements, progress against regulatory improvement areas will be monitored via the Strategic Insight Board Insight Tracker. And Governance and Audit Committee will continue to be informed of progress against our regulatory improvement areas through regular updates on progress. Obviously, we will be reporting to Cabinet for oversight, and progress will similarly be monitored by Audit Wales as part of the Council's annual audit work programme. So, Chair, really, if I can hand back over to you, because, of course, now it is for this committee to consider for their consideration and potential endorsement of the of our proposed actions, really. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and to Samantha and Tom for that update. I think that was a useful update. It's a very interesting paper, this, given the external impacts on this and the causes in relation to what's happened here. So, yeah, I think a really useful one to come to this committee. I think probably it's easiest, and Tom, I don't know whether you can just provide an opinion here of whether it's better to discuss the risk element of this as part of this paper or as part of the risk management paper a bit later on. But certainly for this paper, I was going to split it in terms of the responses to the recommendations in the paper and the risk, if that would work. Tom, are you happy with that if we just consider the risk as part of this paper rather than the one, and then perhaps revisit it later on?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm more than happy with that. And we can pick it up in the recommendation on the corporate risk register as well later. But yeah, it makes sense to discuss it at the same time. We've got education colleagues on the call at this point as well, so that would be helpful.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you. So if we can just open it up first of all, then, in terms of the actual report itself and the recommendations before we go on to the risk, then, are there any questions, first of all, from Governance Audit Committee members?
There's a query from Councillor Goodjohn in the chamber, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Goodjohn?
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions, but let's take them one by one because they're quite broad. So firstly, can I get an update from officers regarding the work that's been done since this audit was completed and the management response was agreed? Because it has been quite a while since the audit was finished, and I know that a lot of hard work has been done behind the scenes, but for public record and for our assurance, can you give us an overview of what's happened since?
I'm wondering, Chair, if it's okay if I ask Trevor to just bring us up to date on that. Trevor, I think you are in the chamber tonight.
If he's here, he's welcome to come on. Hello, Trevor. Thank you.
Trevor is here, Chair, so he'll be joining now.
Hi, folks. Sure. So there's been quite a lot of work that's been going on in the background since the report was published and was done way back in November. So there's quite a breadth of support that's gone into place. Part of this is looking at some of the more transactional issues with schools and some of the support we can do there. So that includes work around things like procurement. So we have 53 schools, 53 separate organizations who are doing things in 53 different ways. So being able to coalesce some of that centrally on behalf of schools, being mindful that schools do have delegated budgets, so they do have authority to spend how they choose. But to coordinate some of that work has been very helpful. To date, off the top of my head, that's yielded a couple £100,000 worth of savings to schools directly, just by changing the way that they procure certain things. That includes some of the services they've been able to buy back from other parts of the council as well, which has been really helpful. On top of that, we have put in place some additional support to schools. So a lot of the decisions that schools are having to make at the moment in relation to their budgets are the way that they deliver their own curriculum and some of the leadership decisions there. So we have procured some additional support in the form of consultancy that's been available to schools. This has looked at it from a couple of different perspectives. One, to make sure that we are always looking at this through the lens of impacts of teaching and learning. And the impacts to those children at the end of the day, and where we can identify best practice in similar schools with different financial contexts and bring some of that learning across. Also to reinforce some of the work and the impact that schools are doing in relation to some of the decisions that they've been taken. We have also procured additional support looking at some of the more nuts and bolts, I suppose, from a curriculum point of view. In terms of some of the staff teaching ratios, for example, some of the TLRs that we have in schools, for example, and those sorts of things. And that's yielded, again, a few £100,000 worth of savings. From a finance point of view, we have put together 5-year forecasts for all of our schools. Mindful, of course, that as you travel further into the future, things become less and less certain. So these are subject to change, of course, depending on how much funding comes through. And some of the exit strategies that schools are looking at in terms of the delivery of their curriculum and where changes might need to happen. We've also held a series of meetings with several of our schools. So as Tom mentioned earlier, we do have variations across our schools. So schools with similar contexts have very different financial positions, and there's a range of reasons that might be the case. But for those who are statistically outliers against both within the council and more nationally, we have held meetings with them and offered additional support. That's in the form of support from HR business partners, from finance support, some of the transformation work that's happening central as a council to make sure that that's available to schools. We've put in place things like Business Managers Network, again, looking at some of the operational considerations with schools as well. So we've been meeting with them for quite some time now. Those meetings began about this time last year and have continued. There's an escalation path that we've had to work through with these schools where we've asked them to revisit their recovery plans as well on a number of occasions. So this is looking at the work that they've done in the background, updating their plans and whether or not those have been able to identify a pathway to recovery. In the short term, that's looking at their in-year deficits as a primary function, and then onwards from that, looking at their historical deficits over a longer period of time. We've also been doing some work from a more strategic point of view for a longer term approach. So this includes work with the Education Endowment Foundation, for example. So a lot of the challenges that we have in schools, we need to identify things earlier and stem the flow of some of those challenges. So what can we do around some of the behavioral challenges we have in schools, some of the issues that we have around things like reading, for example, which as pupils progress through their education become more and more challenging to deal with, and then by extension of that, more expensive to deal with. So that's been a program that's been put in place. We've also put in place a school improvement, I'm going to forget the acronym now because we have so many acronyms within the council. This is a school improvement task force with our head teachers, again, looking at some of these challenges and how we can coordinate that across our schools. School Improvement Partnership Program. Again, a core tenet of that is trying to create some capacity within our schools, which has been a big challenge for them, obviously, in implementing some of these changes going forward. Also, off the back of that, we've been looking at our internal schools funding formula. So there are several mechanisms by which funding comes from central government to Welsh Government to local authorities through the directorate and then into schools, which is a delegated function for them to spend. So we've done a review of our mainstream schools funding formula. One, to make sure it's as transparent and fair as possible, being mindful, of course, it doesn't create any additional funding for our schools, but it does ensure that it's more transparent and fair in the way that it's being applied. And there's a separate piece of work as well, doing a formula review for special school funding. Tom mentioned earlier, and Liz, some of the challenges we have around additional learning needs and the exponential growth we've had around that in recent years. So that's just a flavour of some of the issues that are identified in the report, some of the mechanisms that we've taken in place. All of this then is being reviewed on a regular basis with our senior leadership team within the council to make sure that progress continues, and that includes the chief executive, the leader of the council, the cabinet member for education as well, who have been present and part of those discussions with schools as and when they've been required.
Thank you, Trevor. If I may, Chair, move on. Yeah. So it's fantastic to hear such a comprehensive report back. If I can ask, though, moving from the short term to the long term, the first recommendation around oversight of schools and their balances, and trying to prevent something like this from coming quite suddenly to us again. What kind of lessons have we learned in the long term that we want to maintain past the initial kind of crisis phase? Now we're starting to move away from the initial shock. Are there any processes that are going to be kept in place for the longer term that we're expecting?
I can jump in there again if that's all right. I touched on it earlier. I think some of the biggest things longer term is that work that we're doing with the EEF and the School Improvement Partnership Programme. So this is looking at how do we identify the issues that are there today and prevent them from escalating going forward. These aren't things that are going to turn around the immediate challenges in schools, but they will help to deal with them as we move forward. So just to give you an example, we have challenges in secondary education around behaviours, and there are financial consequences as a result of that in trying to manage some of these challenges within schools. When you're working back and looking at some of those issues, what a lot of the data is telling us, it's things like being able to access the curriculum. So if you become a pupil, you transition into year 7 in a high school, and you're not able to read at the level that you need to be reading at, you can't access the curriculum. That has a huge impact on the well-being of those young people, and as a consequence on their behaviour. And then we start to create infrastructures around that. So earlier intervention and identification, and investing in those changes in primary, for example, which have an impact, a much greater impact, is going to make a difference around that. Equally, there are some lessons learned around the team around the school. So as schools are basically having to reinvent how they deliver their curricula, so they have, individual schools have come together and they've had to develop new curricula. And they are in a position now where they're being asked to reassess that and to change it to make sure it's viable. So that is a big ask for a lot of those schools. It extends far beyond some of the purely financial information and spreadsheets that we're looking at. This is how we educate a child and the impact of some of those decisions. So there needs to be greater emphasis on investing in things that work and learning across schools. So that's where the School Improvement Partnership Programme comes into play. So those are the two major key ones, as well as making sure that schools are accessing some of these things, some of the more transactional bits of support, HR, finance, those sorts of things earlier. And schools are well supported in looking at some of the other mechanisms to support generating revenue for the school, but also the support for the community. So we have several schools who are looking at wraparound provision, for example. It provides a service to families in the area. It provides a service to young people who need wraparound provision and who can access teaching by staff who are in the school and who know those children well. But this is a new sort of venture for schools, I suppose. So rather than schools having to recreate it 53 times where appropriate, we're looking at different options around that to go in and set the framework for them. So those are the sorts of longer term things. Equally, we have challenges around our special education provision. As you'll be aware, this exponential growth in demand within the ALN sector. There are two routes we could do to manage that. We could continue to build and expand our special education provision. To give you some context, once a pupil moves from mainstream education, roughly £5,000 a year per pupil, it goes on average to about £35,000 a year. That could be upwards of £250,000 a year, depending on the needs of those children. Some of them, that is absolutely the right provision for them to have, no question. Others, there is more we can look to within their mainstream setting to support them because there's all of the benefits of being in mainstream with friendship groups, with the support they have available. And if we can meet those needs within a mainstream setting, it provides better outcomes for the children where possible.
Thanks for that, Trevor. I think it's important to note the differences between the things we put in place for now, for the crisis, because we need to, and the things that we can sustain longer term with the resources available to us. And if the partnership's one of those, that'd be great. Sorry, did Liz want to come in?
That was perfect timing because it is around the partnership, really, because we're also very mindful that we need to learn from the process, which is exactly what your question was in the first place. And we have the groups that contain head teachers, and it's obviously incredibly important that we continue to work with head teachers to learn how do we make sure that wherever possible we can avoid ending up in the same position. So we have budget forum and head teacher steering group. Again, they both provide very different sort of very different ways of working with the local authority, but nevertheless they are an extremely rich source of information because they are made up predominantly of head teachers. So the budget forum is a consultative forum, and at the last budget forum, again we were sharing this information, and the head teachers present were very, very keen to look at how could we harness the skills that we already have in the system, because it is learning from all of our head teachers, because some things will work, some things won't. So can we just make sure that we find better ways of being able to learn from the wider group, because we can't afford to wait for one school to solve it, one school at a time. We're running out of time to do that, but collectively we can do that. And then what we also have is the head teacher steering group. And again, this has been, Tom brought this up, a comment from scrutiny, in that we need to be very mindful of head teacher well-being. So the purpose of the taking it to the head teacher steering group is to look at how do we work as a local authority. And when I say local authority, I mean officers and head teachers, because we're all the local authority. How can we create a mutually supportive environment where there is high challenge but low threat? Because no head teacher will have wanted to be in this position. So we are all duty bound to try and work on solutions to get ourselves out of this, because it is a collective problem. So again, it's the recognition that there is still lots to learn, and we do have a wealth of talent and experience out there with our head teachers. But again, we need to find better ways of harnessing that. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. If I promise to finish with this question, I'd be remiss not to ask about, I believe it's paragraph 23 of the Audit Wales report about this committee and the lack of oversight from this committee and the lack of details being given to us, and that being a missed opportunity to inform both us, good governance, and the public. Can I ask what lessons have been learnt from that in the future, and what we're going to do in future, barring the risk, which I know we're going to deal with separately, but barring that risk being added to the risk register, what is going to be different about ensuring that governance and audit, not just with schools, but with any other item, it's informed properly in the future, and bearing in mind the balance between the resource time of report writing and taking action. Any response would be interesting from any officer.
I'm happy maybe to start, Councillor, and Liz may want to come in. I think I flagged at our meeting in December the fact that that this work was concluding and that it was important that we consider it as part of the corporate risk register, and you're absolutely right. The work from Audit Wales does suggest that that we need to improve the visibility of this particular issue to all elected members, including to Governance and Audit Committees. So there are a few things that we're looking to do. One is to put it onto the risk register in its own right. School balances has been part of the corporate risk register, but has been a part of the financial sustainability risk previously. So I think that's the point from Audit Wales, is that it needs the greater level of prominence. Been grateful to Learning and Skills colleagues as well, who've been providing regular updates to scrutiny committees, whether that's the Resources Scrutiny Committee or indeed Start Well, and that's important as individual items, but more importantly, I suppose, than that is the information that is within the Council's revenue budget monitoring reports, which are considered by the Resources Committee on a regular basis. And just to let Governance and Audit Committee know, we've now got a specific schools section within that revenue monitoring report. Pleasing at the last time we took that to the Resources Committee, that there was a dedicated discussion relating to school balances as part of the overall consideration. And in terms then of that learning or that kind of development piece, Councillor Goodjohn, we're currently going through the process of constructing the Directorate annual plans. As part of that, there's consideration at a Directorate level of any potential risks that are existing. That work is concluding now. What it's showing is that there are some risks that are worth us considering escalating to a corporate level or to reflecting within the Council's corporate risk register, which signals that the risk management framework is working, and members will have oversight of that. Your committee will see that as part of the annual self-assessment report, which will be coming to your July meeting.
Sorry to take up more time, but I just wanted to follow up on that very, very briefly. It's great talking about the work that's being done right now to inform members and inform the public. I get that, but I'm talking about preventative measures to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And that doesn't just mean reviewing risks. It's acknowledging when something is enough of an issue that it needs bringing to the Governance and Audit Committee, because it is a matter of absolute urgency, and particularly where governance is involved with that. I'm not pushing for specifics. I'm just asking what has been learned to ensure that we intervene earlier and that we're part of that process earlier without bringing in too many resources from the officers. Again, just report writing instead of taking action.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, and it is a good follow-up, and I suppose it's also a demonstration of sometimes where the democratic process doesn't keep up with the action or the pace. So this audit obviously was completed earlier on in 2025. The actions that had been taken in response to it were done in the late autumn into the winter. The reporting then of the revenue position was considered by the Resources Committee, but that was a couple of months after the Cabinet had considered it. So it's not to say that elected members haven't got access to the information. That information is published in a timely way. The key aspect with all of these things when there are particular issues is to make sure that the Cabinet are aware of them, and then all elected members obviously have access to those papers. Sometimes what happens then is a little bit of a delay in terms of just the scheduling of meetings being considered, but that is absolutely not to say that the work is not happening behind the scenes. When we take the risk register to the strategic leadership team on a quarterly basis, we have a conversation about horizon scanning for risk, which is what is then reflected in update reports to yourselves. So that's the the trigger point. And what we don't do, we don't know, Councillor John, you don't think that we do this, but we don't wait until we bring it to Governance and Audit Committee as a formal meeting before we start taking action against things.
I think I'll have to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom and others, for those responses, and Councillor Goodjohn for those questions. I think there is something there about making sure that these things are highlighted in a timely manner. It does feel a bit late when something's coming as high likelihood and catastrophic impact in a report to us. It sounds like it's a bit late in terms of risk management. We should be more looking forwards. I get that it was part of the finance risk, so something perhaps I just want to come back onto. Are there any other questions on this paper from anyone else in the committee?
Yes, we have from Mr. Matthew Evans, Chair.
Okay, Matthew.
Thanks, Nigel. Couple of questions, one specific and one more broadly on the, I guess, in the same sort of path as Councillor Goodjohn, but slightly more broadly, I guess. The first one, I'm reading the key facts and figures in the Audit Wales, and I'm interested in the timing of the deficit and then the budgeted savings of 1% in 25-26, and whether maybe reflecting back to those two, are there any lessons to be learned from those two interactions? It feels like a position where we knew there was an overspend, we knew there was action needed to be taken, but still there was a budgeted position that felt unlikely with the benefit of hindsight, which I appreciate is wonderful. So I guess question, what have you learned from that, and maybe how you'd approach it differently in hindsight? We deal with that one first, and maybe I'll after that.
We were also keen to respond to that one, Matthew. So yeah, no, thank you for that. The I suppose this is where lots of issues play together, and there's definitely some learning here. One of the key aspects, I guess, is that the council's budget at the time was under significant pressure. Half of our budget is spent on education, so there's always a need to keep a very close eye on the level of spend that exists within schools, and they shouldn't be immune from the pressures that other council services are facing. At the same time, as Trevor was mentioning earlier, the variation is the piece of the puzzle that is particularly the issue here. So what we're not saying is that schools are all we're not saying that schools aren't underfunded, but we are saying that some schools are experiencing variations to a greater extent than we would expect to see. There's definitely some learning in terms of how those savings come through. So the 1% saving was required at the time. We were expecting other council departments to be making in the region of between sort of 4 and 8% in that context, and obviously it has a much stronger gearing effect because of the concentration of spend within schools. I think the lesson for me, and both Trevor and Liz have touched on this, is the interaction between the schools, head teachers and ourselves. And I think that has been strengthened through this process. We came at it from a decent position, but what we are able to do now is have that open dialogue on an ongoing basis. So that would be my kind of take on that, but I don't know if colleagues want to add to it.
I'm just conscious of time as well, and it doesn't look like anyone's going to be coming in on that one unless there's anyone in the room. Apologies, it's quite tricky chairing this from home.
Yeah,
But,
nothing in the chamber, Chair.
okay, thank you. Matthew, does that answer your question enough?
I think in let's move on. I think it's in hindsight, my second question is more of a comment, but we'll leave it there. It's not nothing to stop us moving on.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Yeah, so thank you for those. If there's any other questions, obviously, just please put your hand up in relation to that. Just very quickly looking at the risk then as well. Again, I'll open it up for questions, but if I can just start with one, I think again. I suppose the big question jumping out for me is this one, as you said, was part of the financial resources risk previously. It's now come out its own. It's now rated as likelihood high, impact catastrophic on its own. I suppose, is there anything else that we need to be aware of at this point that's being discussed that could have a similar impact and be this sort of such a significant risk that's currently within another risk that we need to be made aware of at this point? And is that something that, as part of risk management process, is perhaps being considered in a slightly different way, again, learning from the results of this audit?
Thanks, Nigel. And I think it's important just for other committee members to note that the very high rating of the risk is the inherent level of the risk. So that matches the financial resources risk at an inherent level. And then the steps or the controls that the Trevor and Liz have outlined being taken are in effect mitigating that risk to the extent that it now matches the financial sustainability risk at high. So what I'm saying is that yes, it's as risky as the rest of the financial sustainability risk, but because of the significance in terms of its scale and its potential impact, it's important to draw it out in the register as a standalone piece of work. And because of the significant work that is being undertaken, it's really important that we do that. And that's timely at the moment as we prepare the council's budget for consideration by full council on the 9th of March, because financial risk is an important component to the Section 25 report of the 151 officer that accompanies that budget in terms of financial sustainability. So it's useful to have this drawn out as a separate corporate risk in order that members can see and have oversight of the specific actions being undertaken. In terms of your point or your question, sorry, Nigel, in terms of are there other risks that we need to be considering as part of this in terms of lessons learned? The answer is yes, I think so, and I think some of that already takes place. There's one risk, as members are aware, in terms of physical assets which are on the register. I think it would be useful perhaps if we undertook to have a look at that risk to make sure that the components of that risk are all suitably considered in isolation. It's always a balance between is this other sum of the parts risky in themselves to go on the register, or actually is it a combination of those issues when considered together that warrants them going onto the register? But certainly happy if committee would want us to have a look at certainly some of the risks that are more of a combination or a package of issues, just to make sure that there's nothing within those that needs drawing out.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful, because I think one of the things I've learnt from working with organisations in relation to risk is that often when there's a lot of risk kind of combined together, which makes sense maybe at the point it's put together, often then it ends up that actually a lot of that risk is actually really well managed, and it's one aspect of it that can really come and bite you, and that's the bit that you're really concerned about, but that doesn't come through to us as the committee because it's kind of not hidden, but it's all incorporated into that risk. So if there are particular elements of those risks that could be brought out or should be brought out, that'd be really helpful. Are there any other questions relating to this risk element then? I'm not seeing anyone come out. Okay, any comments at all? No. Okay, just one comment from me again on that risk is under the existing controls, I noted that they're all very much dealing with the effect of the risk, whereas the planned actions and what's been included in the report today are far more proactive and talking about the work that can be undertaken to prevent this or prevent it happening in the future or getting worse, which is really positive to see. And again, I hope that learning goes across into other risks as well in the register. So thank you everyone for that conversation. I think it was a really useful conversation, lots of really useful information and a good discussion to have. So if I could just, I think we're being asked just to obviously scrutinise it and then to approve the actions and the coming from the recommendations. So can I have someone approving that, please?
We have Councillor John.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. I got Councillor Prothero as well, a seconding. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to item 5 then, which is the corporate complaints supporting service improvement report. Tom, is that going to be you presenting this one, please? And I think just given time, I think if we can just sort of take it as read and kind of go through it in as a sort of succinct, that would be great, please.
Yeah, not a problem at all, Chair. Thank you. I'm joined this evening by Matt Brushett. Matt is from Audit Wales, and he was the lead on this particular piece of work. So I wonder, Matt, if possible, are you okay just to give committee a brief overview, and then I promise I will be succinct in the management response.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tom. Can I just check you can hear me before I carry on?
Yes, we
All
can.
good.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. So just to say, this audit was a piece of local work as part of our agreed 24-25 audit plan. Main field work took place between May and July 2025. The objectives were just to provide assurance the council has proper arrangements to process, handle, monitor, report and learn from complaints, and to assess the way the council deals with complaints to secure value for money to improve services. I won't go through the scope in detail because I know we're just pushed for time, but that's in the top of the report. Essentially, it was just looking at the strategic approach, handling, and then the monitoring. And you can see the areas of complaints we did not look at. This was mainly related to corporate complaints. Just the key findings, so it was positive to see the council's taken steps to improve its complaints arrangements, but we found the council does not always respond to complaints in a timely way, and there's some weaknesses in its arrangements to support service improvement and reduce the number of complaints. It's just some of the key points. Again, I won't go into too much detail, but in terms of strengths, we found the council had a good understanding of the reasons for the increase in complaints, and we saw that the council had updated its complaints policy in 2025 with clearer definitions, setting out service standards. There was good, regularly updated guidance in place for staff and standards set out on the website so the public know what to expect. Some improving use of digital, including performance dashboard and an IT system, and good to see the council building supportive learning culture around complaints as well. Just in terms of areas for improvement, so wasn't in terms of policy and delivery and process, it wasn't always clear what processes would change following the updated complaints policy and how those would be monitored. Some staff were not aware of the new policy and were involved in its development as well. And at a service level, it just wasn't always clear how service plans take complaints into account. Just looking at performance data, so we could see that some of the 24-25 targets were missed. So it was too early for us to see that the impact of kind of putting changes in place to deal with complaints. And just there were some gaps around training as well. So not all staff had received formal training, for example. And there's just some gaps as well we found in terms of the online information for the public. Just lastly, in terms of monitoring, so we just found there were opportunities to further evaluate the causes of complaints corporately, so not just at a service level. And obviously that's important to ensure that it maximises value for money from complaints by using them for continuous learning. We made 4 recommendations. So these are detailed in the report, but they were mainly around further developing the complaints policy, improving the functionality of the IT system, improving staff training, and finally improving the monitoring and learning from complaints. And we're required to say at committee that we've seen the council's management response and we're happy that the council's properly considered our findings and recommendations. And just lastly, just like to take this opportunity to thank Tom and his team for their open engagement during the course of the audit. And I will hand back to the chair. I won't go any further, and I'm happy to take any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Chair, we lost you briefly then. Are you still with us? Sorry.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you and see you. It all seems to be coming through okay.
Okay. Oh, good. It's crashed on my main screen. That's fine. As long as you can hear me. Yeah, Tom,
Yeah.
did you want to come back in with anything on the responses?
Can do very briefly. Excuse me, Chair. To say thank you to Matthew and the team. It was a useful piece of audit work as part of the overall assurance and risk assessment piece of work. We have been delivering on some of the actions. Members will note that some of the timescales for delivery are either within the next week or two, or indeed have passed. The ones that that have got dates that have passed have been completed, and it's a useful and timely piece of work that obviously we're going to be discussing the annual complaints report as your next agenda item, members, and some of this work is reflected within that as well. So only to say that we've accepted all of the recommendations.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions from any of the committee members?
Just from the chamber, Chair, we've got Councillor Goodjohn wants to raise a question.
Thank you.
John.
Thank you. I have two this time, so it should be briefer. So firstly, I just wanted to ask about different service areas and the complaints process through it. How are we strengthening the force with which we are trying to get service areas to respond to corporate complaints? And if I can, the second one is, at what point do we need more resources put into the system in order to ensure that we are handling complaints with a timely manner? And I'll just briefly say that we visited as the then Corporate Resources Committee, C1V, in 2023, and Tony thankfully spoke with us for a very long time about the detailed issues and problems when it comes to trying to organise an efficient complaint system and efficient call centre. But at some point I have to wonder, when do we need to get that resource in to assist the process when efficiency is itself not enough, and often the problem isn't even in the call centre. So those are my two main questions.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. In terms of the first question on strengthening response and the sort of ownership, if you like, of complaints and responsiveness, it's a really good question, and it's one that we discussed as a leadership team, but also with all of our heads of service. Tony and colleagues came to present not only the audit report that Matt has presented to yourselves this evening, but also the complaints dashboard with the latest annualised figures, but also the up-to-date figures. And I think I know what was useful as part of that discussion was understanding what was actually causing those complaints in the first place, and that's where the link with your second question comes in terms of the level of resourcing. And I don't want to steal Tony's thunder from your next agenda item in terms of the reasons for the complaints, but sometimes that's timeliness of responding to an issue. So it's fine, get through to the contact centre, but if we can't then process what the request is in one of our service areas for whatever reason, that may then lead to a complaint. So what we need to do is understand actually what's causing the complaints to happen in the first place, and sometimes that doesn't need additional resource to go into the system. It needs us to be using that resource at a different time in the process, and that was something that certainly colleagues were very open to when we were discussing these issues, and the proposals within the budget and the cabinet, for example, have approved recently around these responsive street scene arrangements, I think is a good example of how the council is taking the learnings from what Audit Wales have found, but also what our complaints data is saying, but also what our residents are telling us is important to them, and looking at how we organise service delivery in a more proactive way so that we're able to respond in those kind of instances. So that's an example, I suppose, of how we're trying to reflect on these, and I know Tony will draw a few of those out in the annual report item as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Thank you, Tom. Any other questions relating to this paper? Okay, I've just got one relating to recommendation 3, which is the one regarding complaints handlers being suitably trained. I notice it's got a completion date of the 31st of December 2026. I kind of assumed that training would be sort of nearer the beginning of the process, if you like, to get people up to speed, so to have a quicker impact. Just wondered if someone could give a bit of further information on that target date, just to give us a bit of assurance over its implementation, please.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. It's certainly not to say that we haven't started and won't be continuing to do that training. There are quite a large number of people that handle the complaints. We're certainly communicating with all of them, but what we want to do is give ourselves the full calendar year to have worked our way around them, and also to make sure that some of the other process changes come into effect, and we're able to continue to train them on those aspects as well. But yeah, certainly it is a priority. It's just there are lots of people to get through.
Okay, thank you. So it's not about doing the training, it's about making sure that everyone's captured within that. Okay, thank you. Okay, any comments on this paper? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands coming up. So we're asked to consider the findings and the response to the review findings, and then to refer it to Cabinet for oversight and endorsement of the proposed council actions. So can I have an approver, please, if we're happy to?
Councillor Goodjohn in the Chambers seconded that, Chair.
Thank you. So there's Councillor Goodjohn and Councillor Hooper there, so that's great. Thank you very much, everyone. Moving on to the next one, which is linked, of course, which is the Corporate Complaints Annual Report 24/25. Who's going to present this one, please?
This one's going
Tom?
to be presented by Tony Curtis, who's the operational manager previously responsible for corporate complaints.
Okay, thank you. Tony, are you there?
Yeah, here, Chair. Thank you.
Tony, I'll hand over to you then. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, thank you, Committee. I'd like to present the annual Corporate Concerns and Complaints Report for 24/25 and the Ombudsman's annual letter for the same period. Just as a reminder, the Council continues to use the Welsh Government's two-stage model corporate complaints policy. And of course, if a resident remains unsatisfied at stage 2, they can escalate to the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales. Bringing the report today to committee because the Local Government and Elections Act 2021 requires the committee to review and assess the authority's ability to handle complaints effectively. I'd just like committee to note a significant change this year, and Tom has just alluded to the fact that we have, in December 2025, we transferred responsibility for corporate complaints from customer relations to the information governance team in democratic services. The reason for doing that is by bringing complaint handling together with freedom of information and data governance allows us to strengthen resilience across all of those teams at a time of rising demand across all of those areas. As you've already heard, in June 25, Audit Wales carried out a review of our corporate complaints process, and while recognising improvements, they made 4 areas where we could improve further or go further. I won't review those as Matthew mentioned those earlier. But I think it's safe to say that the priorities have been reflected in the Corporate Resources Directorate Plan, and were presented together with the Annual Concerns and Complaints Report to the Strategic Leadership Team in December. And then I think, as Tom alluded to earlier as well, as part of our initial response earlier in February, we presented those findings to SLT and heads of service in a workshop dedicated to the consideration of how complaints can be used to help improve services, reduce future demand, and make better use of our resources. And the outcomes of that work will be reported separately. The Ombudsman letter, annual letter, summarises the work they've undertaken across Wales and in relation to specific organisations, and that's in Appendix B of the report. and we've used the information in this letter and the data published by the Complaints Standards Authority to benchmark our performance against other Welsh councils. The recent transfer of the responsibilities to the Information Governance team and learning from both the Audit Wales and Ombudsman data provide us with a really strong framework for taking this work forward and improving our performance. So getting to the annual concerns and complaints report. So in preparing the report, we have analysed data from our complaints handling system. We have used content analysis of information directly input by complainants to try and get a better understanding of drivers of complaints and how those might be addressed. And we undertook a comparative performance analysis using Welsh Council data published by the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales. Taking all of this data together tells us something about how our organisation and some services are performing. But I think it's important to know that for a more complete insight, the report should be considered alongside a wider set of performance data. Having said that, there were 5 things that we identified as part of our analysis. 1, complaint volumes continue to escalate. Service failure and poor communication are key drivers of those complaints. There are increasing numbers of complaints that have a valid element. In other words, we're upholding those complaints. Although stage 1 investigations appear to be good quality and fair, in that only 4.7% are escalated to stage 2. And the speed at which we respond to complaints, as has previously been mentioned, continues to be a difficult issue. So there were 944 complaints received in 24-25, and that was the highest total recorded, and continued an upward trend of recent years. This trend may indicate that frontline teams delivering high volume customer facing services are under pressure, and shows that we're not consistently meeting expectations around timeliness and reliability, with service failure, delay and lack of communication emerging as key themes driving complaints. And although the national trend for Welsh councils is increasing for numbers of complaints, the rate of increase in our council is sharper, with Ombudsman Complaint Standards Authority data showing that the council moving from being ranked 11th highest to 4th highest in Wales over the last 4 years. It's important to note that the proportion of complaints escalated to stage 2 fell by 38%, indicating that there's a high level of complainant satisfaction with the quality and fairness of our stage 1 investigations. Complaints aren't distributed evenly across the authority, and that distribution reflects a high number of resident interactions for some services. So Environment and Housing Directorate contributed 715 complaints, or 76% of all complaints within the authority. As I mentioned earlier, data input into the Granicus system by complaint investigators show that 78% of complaints are being caused by service failure, and that includes almost 52% relating to delays or services not being delivered. For the first time this year, we undertook a content analysis of information entered directly onto the complaint forms by complainants. So we were looking for common words or phrases to identify trends or drivers of complaints. And that analysis further confirmed that around 48% of complaints related to delays or slow resolution or failed service delivery, while a further 15% involved communication failures. Unsurprisingly then, data from the Granicus platform shows that staff training was the most popular action resulting from complaints for about 39%, and that was followed by a review of service standards at 27% and review and revise information at 23%. So moving on to outcomes. Across Wales, there's a trend of increasing proportion of complaints being upheld, rising to almost 52% for 24-25 for all Welsh authorities. And between 22-23 and 24-25, the proportion of complaints upheld for our council increased from 53% to almost 67%. In other words, 2/3 of complaints were found to have some merit or element of service failure. The Vale of Glamorgan had the 5th highest rate of upheld complaints for the reporting period compared to the 11th highest in 22-23. Again, these outcomes may raise the question whether current service standards remain achievable within existing resources. Responsiveness, as we've previously reported to committee, continues to be an issue which is a hard nut to crack. With only 45% of complaints being resolved within timescales for 24-25. And while 97.72% of complaints were resolved within 30 days, and that compares favourably with the Welsh average of 97.29%, a survey of complainants revealed that only 31% said that they received a timely response, which was down on our previous figure of 45%. A key area for improvement, I think we've recognised earlier, was the ability to demonstrate learning from complaints and make service improvements. So in 24-25, we had 7 examples of service improvement as a result of complaints. They were all from our Social Services Directorate. As part of efforts to improve in this area, we undertook that content analysis in order to gain a deeper insight into the drivers of complaints and potential for targeted actions to address these drivers and make service improvement. In addition, our plan will be to include learning from complaints as a key aspect of future training for complaint investigators going forward. It's an ongoing piece of work and we've got an objective of demonstrating incremental improvements over the next reporting periods. So just finally moving on to the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales annual letter, which is included in Appendix B of the report. The number of complaints made by Vale of Glamorgan residents decreased from a high of 77 in 23-24 to only 64 in 24-25. And that figure of 0.48 complaints per 1,000 residents compares relatively well with the Welsh average of 0.41. So no complaints were taken into consideration, investigation, although 11 required intervention through the early resolution process, and these resulted in 30 recommendations, of which 55% were resolved within target. Access to the complaints process for all of our residents in the Vale is really important, and we undertake an equality survey which is distributed with every complaint response. We had 231 responses, and just some highlights from that: 65% were from residents aged over 45, and only I think 15% were from residents 18 to 24 years. So that's an area for some targeted marketing going forward. 58% of responders have day-to-day activities limited by some form of disability, and 35% of respondents had a limited knowledge of Welsh. Had a limited knowledge of Welsh, and 5.5% were fluent in Welsh. So we're going to use this data, of course, to inform further targeted marketing and promotion of the complaints process to underrepresented groups. So given the previous caveats regarding the need to analyse complaints data in conjunction with other performance data, the insights provided here may indicate for areas for further investigation around service resilience, communication to reduce repeat contacts and deliver more consistent service experience for our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, some key insights in this report, obviously linking back to the last one as well. So some interesting, if slightly worrying reading in some of this. Any questions from committee members? Nothing coming through?
I've got one in the chamber, Chair, from Matthew Evans.
Okay, yeah, Matthew.
Sorry, Nigel. This might just not make it into the report, but I guess if I'm looking at my day job and the way people describe complaints is one of the richest sources of information for service provision and how to improve it. And maybe it's just not a granularity in the report, but you see a lot of categories of service not provided and that sort of thing. But maybe I'm missing that next level to give you that root cause. I said, okay, so service not provided in line with expectations or timeliness, but what does that actually mean? And does that give you a pinpoint in something specific that you can then take forward and improve? And proactively solve it rather than trying to reactively solve the complaint, timeliness, everything like that. Does such a thing exist? Is that something that's just not in the report? Is it on the roadmap, or is it, where's it come into your thinking?
Yeah, thanks. It's a really important point. Look, we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes. We're proactively providing information to service areas, for instance. There's a real-time dashboard available to service managers so that they can see what complaints they've got coming in, exactly what's driving those complaints, so that they can take appropriate action. They can see in detail the specific areas of work where those complaints are being driven from and the causes of those complaints as well. In addition to that, we meet quarterly with SLT so that they can see in more detail exactly what's driving complaints across their areas of responsibility, so that there's complete visibility and the ability to take whatever the required action is, and allows us to identify trends early as well. I think that's when the real-time dashboard is really important. You know, we can start picking up on those trends really early, and service managers can start looking at how they can address those.
Thank you for that one, Matthew. That was very much along my thinking as well. I think there's a couple of bits in the report. The fact that the 7 examples of service improvements all came from social services. I think my question there is there some learning from what they're doing that could be taken into other areas of the council? Obviously, the Environment and Housing Directorate has the highest volume, so just wondering, I'm surprised that there isn't something coming through there around service improvement, although I think, again, that may come into an interpretation of service improvement. I would see service improvement as meeting customer expectations rather than actually enhancing the service, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I'd be interested to know if there's anything that could be learned from what social services have done with those 7 that could be transferred elsewhere. Also, one other is regarding the training being one of the biggest elements that comes out of that. That's quite familiar to me in terms of complaints and saying, well, actually, someone didn't do what they were supposed to, so therefore we've trained them. I just would be interested to know the extent of that training. Is that like formal training where they were absolutely understood that they hadn't done what they were supposed to and therefore it's formal training? Or are we really saying that that sometimes includes a quick word in the ear of someone to say, well, you should have done this differently? Does that kind of come under that training element as well? If so, I'd perhaps like to see something a little more in depth around that. I don't know if there's any feedback, Tony, on either of those areas, please.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of learning from complaints, we had a really good discussion with the strategic leadership team and heads of service earlier in February, and some of the real strengths from the social services complaints process were reviewed then, and that was an action we took away to find out how they're capturing their learning from complaints and what the processes are, so we can share across the rest of the authority. So that's definitely something we'll be taking forward. In terms of training, I guess there's a wide range of activities that would cover. We don't currently capture detail, but I guess the training would it could include an informal conversation. It could include formal coaching. It may also at some point include capability procedure or even disciplinary, depending on the precise circumstances or the frequency of the behaviour. Normal performance management approaches, I guess. Yeah, it would cover the full range.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up. Any comments? No? Okay, in which case we're asked to note the contents of the report, continue to receive the annual update in relation to corporate complaints and compliments, and also to refer the comments from the committee to Cabinet for their consideration. Can I have a proposer, please, if we're happy to do that?
Can I just double check, Chair? Are there any particular comments to refer back to Cabinet?
I don't think so on this one. Only Ernie, I guess, the just points around making sure that we are learning from those complaints and just making sure that that's being carried forward, which I think we just talked through with Tony on that one. So I think that's the primary comment.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for confirming.
Okay, Councillor Hooper, I'll take that as approval unless you come off camera. Can I have a seconder, please?
Matthew Evans in the chamber has also seconded it as well, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. Okay, in which case I'll take us on to item 7, which is lessons learned around the closure of accounts. Who's going to take this one, please? Hi, Gemma.
I will, Chair. Thank you very much. So I think when we brought the accounts back in November, we promised a couple of things. So Audit Wales promised a recommendations report, which is included as an appendix within this document. We as a team promised a lessons learnt review following the 24-25 accounts. And I suppose really important, given that we had quite a challenging audit and we're working to slightly tighter timescales going into the 25-26 audit. Also included as part of this item is the annual audit summary, and that wraps up the finance audit work that's been undertaken, but also the performance audit work that's been undertaken. And obviously there's quite a bit of overlap with some of the other items on the agenda there, but it gives you a kind of annual summary. In terms of the overarching lessons learned, that's been informed by a couple of internal meetings. So one within accountancy specifically, and one more broadly with some of our stakeholders, such as estates and the council tax team. And also we had a joint meeting with Audit Wales. And I've broken those sections down into ways of working and working papers and audit evidence and managing capacity. At the end of the report, there's also an update on the joint committee audit. I don't know whether Mark Jones is online, because I was going to hand over him to run out through the recommendations report initially, and then I'll follow up with the lessons learned element.
Gemma, so
okay.
I don't know
if Mark's happy to come.
Yeah, if you can join us, Mark.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, Mark.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, just briefly, our report is a short report, as you will see. Covers 4 recommendations in terms of the 24-25 accounts. That's, in my experience, that's a relatively low number of recommendations for an audit of a large body like a council. And it also comments on 2 recommendations from last year, which have been actioned, and the report confirms that. So I wasn't going to go into any detail on the report, but of course, happy to take questions. And I certainly, recognise and endorse the comments that Gemma made there, and the catch-up that we had, the session that we had with Matt and Gemma, which was really helpful. So yeah, I'll stop there, but happy to take any questions relevant to audit.
Thank you, Mark. Gemma, did you want to come back in, or are you finished with your bit?
Thank you, Chair. I hadn't finished, but if there are any questions for Audit Wales, happy to pick those up before carrying on, if that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Mark? Matthew?
Thanks, Chair. Probably unsurprisingly, I'm interested in recommendation 1, and I'm interested in Mark, your view from an Audit Wales perspective about the proposal of the council in terms of their approach to journals sign off.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I mean, journals testing is a mandatory part of our audit across all public bodies that we audit. And this was something that we identified and raised this year. The audit lead, John Llewellyn, was new to the audit, and so was I. So there were 2 new auditors on the team, and therefore there may be some elements of questions that were kind of slightly different to maybe past recent audits. But nonetheless, it is a mandatory part of our audit, and as you would have read, the observation is that journals are not reviewed and signed off. So there's a preparer and there's a reviewer. That can be a challenge for large bodies. And again, we recognise that, and therefore we were suggesting in the observations and the recommendations that there are ways to do it where it's above a certain value, and then maybe ad hoc random reviews at periods below that value, and so forth. So the expectation for all journals to be reviewed is quite a challenge for a large body, and we recognise that. It's the one recommendation. With the 4, we say, is the recommendation fully accepted? And the officers put a yes or a no. So for the other 3, the officers put yes, and you probably would have read and noticed that for this one, there was a no. But the comments do go on from officers to clarify that they will be trialing a process along the lines of some sensible balance on it in terms of the 25-26 accounts and the journals relating to that year of account. So I'll stop there on those comments. If I haven't answered your point, please come back and I'll comment further.
Yeah, do you mean I certainly don't want to labour the point. I guess I've got a kind of 2 hats. I've got my theoretical hat that says every journal is a baseline financial control. Every journal should be sort of countersigned or whatever. But I completely understand the pragmatism and the need to review that. I guess what I want to make sure is, from an Audit Wales standpoint, that we wouldn't be seeing this recommendation every year without any real fundamental need for it. And so that's the point about whether you're comfortable with a proposed change. And the other one is, I guess, my slightly more selfish point is, I can see the point about large journals, but I wouldn't mind a slightly more risk-based approach that says not only large journals, it's also ones maybe that are different to normal, maybe done at different times, different complexities. So maybe just a broader brush than just it's large, so we're going to look at it, or random sampling. I think it'd be a bit more informed, but that might just be my slightly more geeky side coming out.
If it's okay for me to just come in on that one. So I think where we've kind of accepted that there is risk around journals is particularly around the kind of high value closing journals. Although I would maintain that because most of those have dedicated disclosure notes, they're relatively easily reconciled and should be glaringly obvious where there's a major error. I think in terms of our monitoring and our kind of journals that take place throughout the year, largely those are looked at by more people. So we've got more separation of duty on kind of revenue monitoring and capital monitoring throughout the year. So you've got your kind of budget holders, but you've also got teams of kind of finance staff feeding into that. So I'm happy to be wrong. We've taken the view that because you've got more separation of duty throughout the year, it's those kind of larger year-end journals that perhaps are done under high levels of stress, where there could be some error, and therefore that's why we're proposing the peer review. What we have said is that we have a cost pressure in for some additional technical capacity. So should that cost pressure be approved, we're unlikely to recruit for this year's closing process, but we'd be happy to keep that under review going into future years' closing. Because at the moment, I'd be reviewing my own journals probably, essentially, and so it's not possible. But I think peer review in year, so we're moving towards that. Prepare a reviewer, which I want to move to more generally anyway, and then keep that under review going into future years then, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you all. Yeah, I think that sounds like a sensible approach there in terms of that. But I think noting the resource requirements around that and making sure that that's taken into account, I think Matt's view of having it as a risk-based one as well, I think is something just to take into account in terms of it's just not always just a financial one. There could be a complexity one as well, where again, just that peer review can just have that double check on it and just protect both you as well as the organisation or whoever's undertaking that journey. It's there for their protection as well, not just for the accounts. Brilliant, thank you. Gemma, did you want to finish off your section then, assuming there's no other hands going to go up or in the room regarding Mark's part of it?
Well, just really quickly, I wasn't going to go through the contents of the lessons learnt. I think it's, relatively self-explanatory. Obviously, we're always really keen to kind of improve on the previous year, and we've had some really constructive conversations with Audit Wales, and we have commenced the interim audit already for the 25-26 accounts, and I think we're seeing some improvement already. And then I just wanted to draw committee's attention to the joint committee update. So I know obviously the joint committees are the bodies that are authorised with governance, but we obviously bring them to Governance and Audit Committee for information. So just to say that the Regional Adoption Service accounts, there's a national review being undertaken to inform the type of accounts that are required. So the annual return has been completed for the Regional Adoption Service, but given the value, there's some discussion about whether some of that expenditure and income is on an agency basis, which would take it below the threshold for full account. So there's a national review being undertaken on that. And the SRS audit is quite well advanced, and we're hoping we're drawing to the end of the testing. I think me and Mark are of a similar opinion there. There's a couple of tests still outstanding though, but hoping to be finalising those accounts shortly. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Gemma. Are there any other questions from any other committee members?
Just one in the chamber, Chair, from Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, can I just ask about recommendation 4 and the lack of council tax report? Can you elaborate a little bit more as to how that came about?
Yes, absolutely. So I think as Mark mentioned, so we had a couple of new auditors this year, and so the different tests were performed, different levels of information. Some of that is informed by the information that auditors have, been able to access elsewhere. And obviously we have our kind of standard schedule of reports that are run every year, and the council tax system, you have to run the reports as at 31st of March, and it continues to move on. So because we hadn't provided that information before, it wasn't on the schedule of information that ran, arguably should have been, but it wasn't. And so whilst we were almost able to recreate the information, we weren't able to recreate it in full. And so those reports will be run this year at the 31st of March.
Great, just confirming that's an oversight, that's not a resource issue with the team.
It's an oversight, absolutely, yeah.
That's fine then.
Great, thank you. So unless there's any more questions, are there any comments? I think just from my perspective, it's just always good to see this sort of lessons learned, because it's always good to look at continuous improvement and see how you can improve. So I think that's a real positive. In terms of the recommendations, then we're asked to consider the lessons learned and associated actions, consider and agree the recommendations and proposed management response, and to consider the content of the annual audit summary attached. I think if we're happy to approve those with whether it's actually an amendment to the response or just something to note going forwards around just the journal approvals, just in terms of if and when resources allow, perhaps re-looking at that and also doing on a more risk-based approach. Are we happy to approve those recommendations? Councillor Hooper, thank you. And a seconder?
And Councillor Goodjohn seconding from the chamber, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, on to item 8, just another short one for item 8 there, the Treasury Management and Investment Strategy 26-27, an update for 25-26. Can someone take us through this, please?
That'll be me again. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
So I'm conscious that members have had training on Treasury Management this evening, and I promise I'm not going to sit here and read a lot of numbers out at you. So just a really high-level overview of Treasury Management, but happy to take any questions. So this report does a few things. So there's the in-year monitoring position for 25-26, the strategy for 26-27, and that sets things like limits for borrowing, likely levels of borrowing, and there is consideration about affordability of borrowing and interest costs as well. We also have the MRP policy, which is the funding that we're setting aside to repay capital expenditure. This has been prepared in compliance with the Treasury Management Guidance, of which it's listed in the report. And in terms of the 25-26 position, we can confirm all the Treasury Management activity complies with the approved strategy. So within the report, we're setting out the borrowing and the investment activities in 25-26. So borrowing has increased to 178.872 million. And that increase is 11 million from PWLB and 3.5 million from local authorities. And that PWLB borrowing is relatively short. So there's loans for 1 year, 2 year and 12 years in terms of that new borrowing. And some of that was taken out at the HRA preferential rate. In terms of investments, we've continued to utilise the DMO, local authorities, money market funds and Lloyds, which is a relatively risk-averse approach, and the sums have been kept relatively liquid. At the end of December, investments were 51.65 million with an average investment return of 4.15%. And I think the figures we saw on the training tonight was slightly lower because that's based on our current position. In terms of the 26-27 strategy, you'll see the statutory prudential and treasury management indicators set out in the report. And these are set based on the capital expenditure of 138,926,000. So it sets out capital prudential indicators for the capital financing requirement, external borrowing, which is expected to increase by 54.874 million, and will include 15 million of replacement borrowing. We also set out the operational boundary for borrowing, which we could occasionally exceed, although we shouldn't regularly exceed it, and the authorised limit, which we would never exceed. And we have set out these indicators for the medium-term financial period, so 2026-27 to 2030-31. And throughout that period, we're estimating 306 million of new borrowing, 219 million of which is for the housing revenue accounts. And sorry, I'm reading numbers out to you, apologies, and 45 million of which will be replacement borrowing. In terms of the net revenue stream, which is set out within the prudential indicators, that is one of the key indicators that sets out the affordability of borrowing by comparing that to our budgets and the available budgets for repayment of financing costs. And that's based across the General Fund and HRA. In addition, for the housing revenue count, as part of the housing improvement programme, we do quite a lot of sensitivity and affordability tests on borrowing. For the MRP policy, members may recall that we brought a revised policy to Governance and Audit Committee relatively recently, and this is reflected in the policy that's been set for 25-26 and 26-27. We are proposing to continue to use the asset life method, and total MRP for 26-27 is 5.3 million for the general fund, which includes 1 million for leasing and 1.99 million for the HRA. Pleased to confirm that we've been advised the HRA preferential rate will continue in 26-27. And those are the main points I was going to draw on the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gemma, and I appreciate the effort of limiting the amount of numbers that we use then. There are a lot of numbers in this paper, so I do appreciate that you did your best efforts at reducing the numbers said in that presentation, so thank you for that. Are there any questions on this paper from members?
Chair, we've got one from the Chamber from Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you.
I promise I'll be
Councillor
quick. So two. So firstly, the MRP policy that we've recently implemented of 50 years. I just want to check that the average asset life is being kept under review to ensure that they're in line. And secondly, I want to confirm that this strategy is in line with the review of reserves being done by the Section 106 officer and matters part of the budget planning and especially regarding school deficits and ensuring that it's not interfering too far with our investment strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. So I am just trying to find the figure in the report, but I am pretty sure that having reviewed the asset life of the schemes that we're going to spend the general capital funding on for 25-26, as at the time of writing this report, that we're proposing to charge MRP for 25-26 on a 43-year asset life. Matt's nodding, so I think that's the right figure. And then in terms of the reserve projections that underpin our assumptions around borrowing, we have fed in our kind of underlying reserve projections, but what we have done is make some provision for slippage on the capital programme, which we typically see, and also impacts our use of reserves. So otherwise, obviously, we'd be overstating our borrowing needs. But what we do then is remove that adjustment when we come to set things like the authorised limit and the operational boundary.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any comments at all? Feels like we haven't really done justice to the amount of work that went into this paper, but I think that shows the quality of the paper itself and the information that's in there. So thank you for that and for the effort put in. I think it is a clear paper. So if I won't read through because there's 4 recommendations for this paper which are detailed there. So I won't read them all out because there's quite a lot in there. But is someone happy to approve this, please?
From the Chamber, we've got Councillor Goodjohn.
Great, thank you. There's Councillor Goodjohn and Councillor Hooper on the screen as well. So thank you for those. Brilliant, that's great. Thank you. So on to corporate risk then, paper 9, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just as a quick overview for members of committee in terms of the corporate risk position at Q3, your report has got 2 aspects to it. As ever, the first Annex A is a response to the queries that committee raised at your last meeting when we looked at the risk register, and then Annex B is the updated risk register itself. In terms of the queries that committee had at Q2, they related to wanting some further information with regards major regeneration projects. Marcus Goldsworthy, who's the Director of Place, is with us this evening, and I'll bring him in a moment. You also asked for some further clarification and consideration relating to cyber and security risk, and also we had a discussion around the forecast direction of travel across all the risk categories, and the report gives you some information on those. So if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll bring Marcus in to give an update around those regeneration projects, and then I'll carry on with the remainder of the register, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Tom.
Great, so over to you, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair and Tom. I think just to clarify, has my camera come on? Because I've got a blank screen.
It's not come on, Marcus. We can hear you. We got no video, I'm afraid.
Just checks his camera button's not clicked on.
Can you just double check the camera button hasn't been pressed on the EasyCom screen?
No.
No.
Sorry,
okay.
No. It was working fine.
Right, but we can hear you, Marcus.
Okay.
If you want to carry on,
I'll
as long as committee happy.
I'll push on. Thank you, Mark. So just to update members, this is in respect of the Barry Making Waves, obviously major regeneration project, nearly £20 million project. Funding was originally awarded by UK government back in 2023, then agreed again in 2024. So there was an update report which went to Cabinet in October of last year, and I think members of this committee were aware of that update report. Since that update report has been to Cabinet, there has been some movement in progress. Firstly, just to set out in respect of the actual land that is involved, so that is the mole, as we call it, which is the promontory of land which projects into the Barry Docks. We have now agreed a formal price with ABP in respect of that land. And we've also agreed, or are in the point of agreeing a heads of terms with ABP, so that the actual dock wall and revetment that goes around that area of land will be retained by them, and the responsibility to maintain that land, that revetment going forward, will be their responsibility, not the council's. We have agreed an overage clause in respect of the land as well. And so that is quite a considerable step forward from where we were back in October of last year, where there were still some concerns about resolving the heads of terms around the purchase of the mole. There is a new issue which has arisen. We understand that it's a more technical and bureaucratic issue, if you like, which is the need for a harbour revision order. ABP were under the impression originally that a harbour revision order wasn't required. However, following them obtaining legal advice, it does seem this may well be the case. They will have to progress the harbour revision order to essentially remove the mole from the working harbour or working dock. It's an application to Welsh Government, which has to take place. Welsh Government and the Welsh ministers have the decision-making powers around that. In terms of timing, while a little bit unfortunate, this will happen at the same time as the updated planning application is considered by the council, and so currently we do not think it will delay the project any longer than, for example, obtaining the planning permission. So it should run in tandem with that planning process. There's nothing, the two processes are completely independent as we understand it, and one is not reliant on the other, so they can run alongside each other. In respect of the scheme, the other part of the scheme, which is the docks office and the move to progress to a new office building or incubator unit for people to occupy, that is progressing well, and the process of trying to get a partner to run that building for us going forward is now in its final stages. That part of the process will continue to progress, and we expect to have a partner. We have two players interested, and we expect to appoint a preferred partner in the next month or so. And then the final issue, really, which has come to light at the moment, is the cost of the scheme as a whole. We are currently doing some work with our partners levels on the scheme itself and the cost of delivering the overall scheme, excluding the docks office, so the scheme to deliver the mole development. As everyone is aware, costs have risen since the original award of funding in 2023, and those costs have affected every part of the scheme, including the proposed park, the infrastructure that is needed to get onto the mole, including the road, and indeed the proposed Ocean Water Sports Trust building, which is located on there. Currently, we have identified a funding gap. It's not in the scale of the scheme. It's a funding gap that we feel we can close through a combination of value engineering, looking at the value of the housing which will be delivered on the scheme, which isn't actually part of the Levelling Up programme itself, or not part of the actual delivery, but it will form part of the wider scheme. and also looking at things like other possible grants which might be available to fill some of the gaps that we might have. So while this is not an unusual situation, when you're delivering a regeneration program over a long period of time, it is quite common that we come across these funding gaps, and we're used to looking at the costs of provision around that. So while that is there at the moment, that situation is not unexpected, and is something we experience on any number of our regeneration schemes throughout Morgan, and in fact have experienced going forward over a number of years. So that's pretty much where we are with the Barry Making Ways project. That is why we've retained the element of risk at the same level it is now. We are moving forward and making really good progress with it, as is always with these schemes. As you take one step forward, you sometimes get new risks and new issues which arise. We are dealing with those risks, and we have a really robust risk management process in place, and of course a really robust governance program in place in terms of dealing with it. I don't know if anyone's got any further questions about it now.
Councillor Hooper, did you want to come in there?
Thanks, Nigel. Thanks, Marcus. I think we need more detail than you've just provided, frankly, on that. This is, you've raised a few things that are somewhat concerning and weren't in the report. I don't understand this harbour revision order. If it's not provided, surely the planning permission wouldn't be able to be granted. It would surely make a big difference on that. I'd like to understand that better. The docks officers just saying progressing well. What's the timescale? What's the detail on that? I'd like a bit more on that. Thank you. And also you talk about the cost of the scheme increasing. What's the gap? What's the difference? I appreciate you say we've got strong governance and processes around it. We're the Governance and Audit Committee. I think we'd like to know a little bit more than just warm words. And the final thing, and it's not been referenced in here, this was meant to be a marina when it was started. There was a lot of energy put into the to getting the residents to support a marina project. I wonder whether we've gone back out and said, this is what you're getting now. What do you think? Because I've not seen that in any of this material so far. Thank you.
Marcus, can you respond to those, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed. In respect of the harbour revision order, Councillor Hooper, the two pieces of legislation are completely different. So as we understand it, and we are getting some legal advice to clarify this, but as we understand it, gaining planning permission would not be dependent on the harbour revision order being in place, and vice versa. So harbour revision order is not dependent on the planning permission being in place. The harbour revision order itself is a procedural matter and deals with what is, if you like, operational dock. Having had conversations with Welsh Government, it seems that they've never dealt with one to actually remove land from a dock. It seems to be they've largely have in the past been undertaken, and the ones that are currently being considered are all around expanding docks and increasing the size of harbours. This situation where you actually take land out is pretty rare, actually, but it is a completely separate legislation to the planning process, and one is not dependent on the other. So just to give that clarification and to give that comfort. And if that were to change, if we were to get legal advice which told us anything different, we would report that back. But currently, as we understand it, the situation is the two are not dependent on each other. In respect to the docks office, it's fair to say that that process is running in accordance with the timescale that was set out with in the report. The docks office itself has gone through a procurement process to establish a partner, to identify a partner to work with us over the delivery of what would be Grade A office accommodation. That process, as I say, is nearing completion. It was a four-stage process to actually procure a partner. Once those partners are procured, then what we will do is we will progress to the delivery of the scheme itself. That will be the council who is delivering the scheme, and that is on target in terms of identifying what works need to be done to the docks office. Obviously, one of the key parts of the scheme will be ensuring the docks office is actually vacant for those works to commence. And we are looking to start works later in this year on the docks office. So we would look to get the building itself clear of all council staff before that. And the ultimate aim is to have the office or the works to the office completed prior to the March 2028 deadline. So there is a significant amount of work that will need to be done to the docks office. That includes a new emergency stair to the building to allow the full capacity of the building to be used. Those works and the architect that's working on that scheme is already identifying two different options for that. And they are mainly internal options, utilising the atriums in the building itself to get those staircases in. Those would meet the terms of the listing of the building itself. So we are currently on target to deliver that building and deliver the office space at the very latest by March 2028. We would hope that might be actually slightly earlier, but we will be working to deliver certainly by the time that should be complete. I think the next issue you raised was the funding gap, and the funding gap is a really difficult question to answer. Levels, who are our partners, commissioned extensive groundworks of the mole. Previously, we've been working on the information that was provided by ABP in respect of the ground conditions, which didn't actually throw up any areas of particular concern, but there were Levels themselves had some areas that they felt we needed to explore in more detail. Those ground exploration works have been undertaken, and the ground conditions are currently being assessed as part of that work. We don't yet know exactly what that means. Contingencies have been put in above and beyond those that were originally in place of 1.2 million. We don't know whether that would be needed yet or whether less is needed. And obviously that's something that we will need to clarify in the next month or so when we get the report back from Levels who are doing that work, or the agents doing the work for Levels, I should say. The funding gap is somewhere in the region of 2 to 4 million, dependent on what the contingency throws up and what the groundwork show up. That funding gap is, while sounding quite considerable, we do feel could be closed quite easily. For example, elements of the scheme, such as the Ocean Water Sports Trust, are throwing up high values, over 6.5 million, for example, for that building, and there is the potential to reduce some of those costs. There is the potential to reduce costs throughout the scheme to meet the needs of any funding gap that is thrown up. We are looking, as I mentioned, at other possible funding sources which could help with the scheme to close that gap, including things like the forthcoming local growth fund, which could also be used and has been used by other councils, or is proposed to be used by other councils in some other levelling up schemes. Likewise, shared prosperity funding has been used by other councils to close gaps in other schemes across Wales. So we do have mechanisms in place to close the gap whenever we know exactly what that gap is. We don't actually know what it is, and it's fair to say that the gap may be considerably smaller depending on what comes back from the groundwork assessment that's currently underway. And then finally, Councillor Hooper, you mentioned the marina. The marina obviously was originally a key part of the scheme, and sadly, due to ABP's withdrawal from the project, has meant we cannot progress with the marina. What we will be doing going forward is there will be a planning application, an amended planning application coming forward, which will obviously involve considerable consultation with the public. You will be aware that the application is actually still in place and currently does include the marina. So it will be amended to draw attention to the fact that the marina is no longer part of it, but obviously that use of the water remains very much a part of the scheme through the Ocean Water Sports Trust and the college, combining with a scheme which intends to, or the new building, sorry, which intends to focus on use of the water. So in terms of consultation, that will be very much a part of the process, but largely through the planning process. And we are expecting an amended planning application to be complete within the next month, and then for a new formal planning consultation process to be undertaken. Certainly before in early summer at the very latest, probably late spring is the more likely date. So hopefully that has answered some of the questions that you raised around the scheme.
Councillor Hooper, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I just through you, Chair, I wonder whether actually we need to have more information on this, and more information that's actually written down, not just being discussed through. I think there are questions in this that this committee deserves significantly more information on that. I worry about when we're saying that we've not seen one of these harbour revision orders yet, but it won't affect it. That worries me. If they've never done it before, that'll come with a huge amount of risk. I think suggesting that it could be the costs could be more, it could be less or the same. They could be more because we don't know what this ground was. So I think we need to know that. And the point I made about resident views wasn't through the planning process. The process when we came to this marina was done through a much wider process of residents consultation. Planning process, as Marcus knows, is very weak in terms of consultation. It'd be really interesting to understand residents' views more broadly. So I wonder, through you, Chair, maybe as a recommendation that we take this as an item that this committee has more information on this, and it's a bigger report going forward. I wonder what the views of the rest of the committee are in this regard.
I'd be happy with that. Does anyone else? Marcus, did you want to come back in on that quickly?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to advise that we are proposing, and we have, as you will have seen from the report in October, we do prepare very detailed progress reports on this scheme to Cabinet going forward. And those reports are prepared in timely manner, but will cover areas as and when we sign them off. So while I understand completely Councillor Hooper's comments, we can't provide information we don't have. So we have to have that. We have to have that information. We would expect the next report to Cabinet to be around about the time the next planning application, the updated planning application is received, because when that comes in, we would have expected to receive information about the bowl groundworks, for example, and also we would have had an updated position on the procured partner for the docks office. Those are sort of key milestones that we're expecting in the next month or so, and so we would expect something in probably May time to be reported to Cabinet around progress. So I would suggest that perhaps if the committee is interested, that the report is forwarded on to from Cabinet is forwarded on to the committee.
Councillor Hooper, would you? I'm thinking that there's two different aspects to this. There's one is progress of the project, but I think we're also talking about this from a risk and governance perspective, which is a slightly different perspective. But I wonder whether that report would be a good starting point for us to at least see a bit more of the detail in practice, whether then we consider whether a further report is necessary. What are your thoughts?
I'm going to reiterate the point I made a few minutes ago. This is an issue of risk and governance and management of that risk, which is where my concerns are. My confidence level is not high based on what we've heard this evening, and therefore I suggest that we have a report that's less discursive and actually a report that we can consider in more detail. It can start with the report to go to Cabinet, perhaps, but I have no idea on the timescales of that, and the risks to the council seem to be, as addressed, as outlined here, seem to be increasing, not decreasing on this project. I think we need more data, more information.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hooper. Yeah, I think it is that difference in it's not a project update report. It's a risk report on what is the potential, both positives and negatives. So I agree with Councillor Hooper. I think there's a lot of, well, the funding gap that's been identified could be reduced, but equally, as you said, could get bigger. I think there's the three areas that were highlighted there, something around the costs, around the process, and you know, some of those elements that are unknowns at the moment, but also the residents' view. I think if we could just get an update paper to the next meeting, just to give a bit more perhaps data and information, evidence-based report around where we're at, and appreciate that this is about risk, so it isn't knowns. There are unknowns here, but I think it's a reflective report on both the potential positives that could come out of it, or potential elements that could go well, but also the potential things that could go wrong as well, and just trying to understand a bit more of the position. Then appreciate your point, Marcus, that we know that we are asking about what could happen without the knowledge of what will happen. So with that in mind, I think if we could just have a report. I don't know whether anyone else in the meeting has a view on that report. I don't know whether Tom, whether you wanted to come in on that at all from a risk perspective.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hooper, as well for the questions. And Marcus and I have just been exchanging some messages in terms of the timing of that report to Cabinet, and equally the timing of the update report to this committee. And I think it would be entirely possible within the Cabinet report to ensure that those aspects of risk are pulled out, specifically relating to the Making Waves project, and for Marcus then to have a discussion with the Cabinet member around that report formally being referred to your committee. I think, based on the discussion as well from committee this evening, that this corporate risk is around the delivery of major regeneration projects. More widely, obviously, Making Waves is the most significant, but not exclusively the only project. So perhaps, Chair, in addition to Councillor Hooper's recommendation relating to the report coming on the Making Waves project, perhaps that Marcus and I could do some further work around this corporate risk holistically, so that the next time you see the risk register, you've got the kind of breadth of the regeneration risks reflected, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think our next meeting is June, so I think if the Cabinet report is to May, I think that would cover off those risk elements, as long as that's a specific element included in that report then, and that additional work you've just suggested, I think that covers that off then, without creating a whole new report as well. So I think that achieves the outcome. So yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Are there any other questions on this paper? Are there any other questions on any risks at all? Yeah, Mark.
From the chamber, we've got Councillor Goodjohn wants to raise a question. And then Tom is going to come in after Councillor Goodjohn.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And can I remind Councillor Hooper that if he is no longer a councillor by the time the report comes to us, he is welcome to attend as a member of the public as well. So I think there's two issues here that I don't think we have enough detail on. So firstly is on the additional learning needs risk. We recommended to Startwell that they begin a task and finish group on the additional learning needs risk. And I haven't seen any feedback from that to this committee. So I wonder officers' opinions on bringing the report of the task and finish here for our oversight, to ensure that we are satisfied that there is enough identification of risk in regards to that report. I'm not certain about doing that, but I'm open to people's opinions. The second one is on the housing and homelessness risks. Now, what's really interesting about this is it seems to indicate that the latest legislation being introduced by Welsh Government may increase the risk of homelessness existing within the Vale of Glamorgan due to limiting the scope of how we are allowed to deal with homelessness and increasing the duty of those that we deal with. So I'd be interested as to some more information as to how we're mitigating the risk. And I'm cautious that officers that may have the most expertise in this matter aren't here with us right now, but that would be quite interesting to hear.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And I don't know whether, Chair, do you want me to quickly finish summarising the rest of the report, or do you want me to respond to Councillor Goodjohn's questions first? I can do either.
Shall we respond? Sorry, I've completely forgotten where we'd got to on that. So yes, thank you for bringing that back up. Shall we respond to Councillor Goodjohn's question first,
Yeah.
and then once that's gone, we'll just then carry on with the rest of the other report. Thank you.
Of course, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. In terms of the ALN work, I think it's a really good challenge back to make sure that the department are considering the recommendations of that task and finish group in at the same time as when they're reviewing their corporate risk. So I wondered whether, as a first stage, once that work has concluded and the recommendations are formally made and importantly responded to, that that perhaps committee would want me to make sure that the actions in that are reflected within the corporate risk, because and I think that's something that perhaps I can discuss with my democratic colleagues as well, to make sure that that connection with all task and finish group is always made, so that there's that added value to it. In terms of the query around housing and homelessness risk, the forthcoming legislation increases the level of risk associated with the council's response to housing and homelessness, not in it itself that the Welsh Government legislation is making it more likely that there's homelessness. Part of the budget proposals that the council's been consulting on over the last few weeks, and obviously Cabinet will see and consider on Thursday of this week, includes a cost pressure to invest in that preventative element of the service, which is what the new legislation will require bodies to councils to do. So if that cost pressure is awarded, that will help to ensure that that part of the system is working effectively in line with that new legislation.
If I can come back quickly, yeah, the first point I think is really important with the ALN. I think that's a great way of dealing with it after the response is made, and confirming that we believe that the recommendations of the task and finish are being kept to. That can be done within the risk register, I agree. I wonder if that could be perhaps even dealt with separately within the agenda item, just to make sure we have highlighted focus on it. I don't mean having to do a whole new report. I just mean have that specified within the report. And secondly, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that because the homelessness risk is forecast to increase, that homelessness is forecast to increase. What I'm suggesting is, due to the limited natures of the ways that we can help handle homelessness with the rationale of the forecast increase, it seemed to indicate that were resources not available to it, that we may not meet our statutory requirements, and that in of itself would be homelessness because of the nature of the legislation. So that was purely my question, and I think the resource element to it with the cost pressure is a good response, but I'd want to know as part of the next or maybe the one after that risk register, that the resource is being used effectively in order to deal with the risk. I think that's all I'm looking for.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, and for that clarification. That's really useful. And if committee are content to, we can certainly make sure that in the next report we've got some highlight sections, a bit more detail around the housing and homelessness risk, and as well the ALN piece. No problem at all.
Great, thank you both for that. Okay, yeah, Tom, if you can just go through any other parts of the report you wanted to cover. I think you were going to do a bit on the cyber risk as well, weren't you? So yeah, that'd be great.
Absolutely, and I'll be really brief, members. I promise. So the first element of follow up was more information around that regeneration schemes. So thank you to Marcus for coming in and the discussion there. The second was committee wanted a little bit more information around the information and cyber security risk, in particular as a result of some of the cyber incidents that we've seen happening within supply chains of major organisations. So the report provides some additional information relating to the cyber assessment framework process, which the Council is undertaking with the WLGA, and following that prompt by the committee last time, the score for that risk has been escalated to from medium high to high. Committee also asked for some more information in the rationale behind forecast directions of travel as well, and I hope members will welcome the introduction of a new section which breaks down the forecast direction of travel and gives a bit more narrative so that members can see at a summary level that information. But if you look in the individual risk assessments as well, the full detail against all of those is included. In terms of the actual register itself, there are 12 corporate risks on the register. Committee are also recommended to approve or endorse the approval of that 13th risk relating to school balances. One of the risks scores very high, 6 scoring high, 2 medium high, and 3 risks are scoring medium. As I mentioned, there's been an increase in the information and cybersecurity risk to high in this quarter as committee requested. All other risks have remained static. And in terms of the forecast direction of travel, forecasting continuing for the workforce and organisational change risk to de-escalate over time, and 4 risks on the register that were forecast to increase over the year, including information and cybersecurity, climate change and the nature emergency, housing and homelessness, and the digital risk. The report itself, Chair, sets out the rationale for each of those, and the 7 remaining risks are forecast to remain at the same level. So for completeness, we've included the school balances risk within this report, but also within your previous report relating to the work that Audit Wales colleagues have undertaken. So that's a really quick overview of the rest of the register.
Thank you, Tom, and sorry to have cut you off in the middle of flow there, so apologies for that. Are there any other questions relating to anything within this risk update paper? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Any comments at all? Just a quick comment from me that I really welcomed that additional bit of information that we asked for. I found that very useful, and I think it's good that as a committee we almost work through some of these risks as well. So I think although there's a specific need around some of the regeneration schemes and things like that to get that update on at the moment, there's specific areas of concerns, but also things like homelessness. I think it's actually a positive process that we undertake to get a bit more of almost a deep dive on some of these risks as we go through at the right times. So I think that's a really positive process that I hope will continue into the future. So thank you for that. So if I'm correct, and if any members want to come in and correct me here if I've got any of this wrong, but we've got the 3 recommendations for this paper, but also that we will be getting a report on the risks around the regeneration schemes, such as making waves, which we discussed in quite a lot of detail. So I think just a report on those specifically focused on the risks and the governance aspects of those. So I think there's a report to the June meeting, if possible, on that one, but also some inclusion of more information in the reports, and not a separate report, but just some more information within the text of the report around things like the task and finish group, in relation to ALN, and also just on what's happening with homelessness. So I think those are the recommendations we're looking for approve. I'll take silence as a yes. Yes, Councillor Hooper. Is that an approval, or did you want to come in? So I'll take silence as approval. Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And a seconder, please.
I have a seconder here from Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, on to item 10 then, which is the Q3 progress against external regulatory recommendations. Can someone lead us through this one, please? Is that you again, Tom?
It is, Chair, thank you. Really brief introduction to this one, you'll be pleased to know. This is your quarterly report on regulatory report tracking. There are 28 actions that are currently being tracked through that process, which is overseen by the Strategic Insight Board and SLT, yourselves, and then Cabinet. Pleasing that 24 of the 28 have got a green status, 4 have got an amber status, and there are no reds currently. So that breaks down across the work that has been associated with local regulatory recommendations. So there are 20 of those, there's 24 of those, 20 have got a green status, 4 an amber. The 4 local regulatory actions that have got an amber performance status relate to 1 action around the Welsh Housing Quality Standard Review. That's pending the introduction of the new self-service technology. 1 relating to the Digital Strategy Review, which is around a model for measuring and reporting value for money as a result of, savings as a result of digital improvements. And then the remaining ones are a couple associated with a review that Estin did around adult community learning, and updates on all of those are provided within the appendices to this report. There are 4 actions that are ongoing in relation to national regulatory recommendations. All 4 of those are green currently and don't cause any concern. So committee are being asked to note the progress being made against local and national recommendations, and also, Chair, to approve the removal of completed local regulatory actions. 3 of those relate to the work that Audit Wales undertook with regards commissioning services, and 1 in terms of the complaints report that we heard earlier, because one of those actions has already been undertaken. And then finally, to complete one of the actions relating to the equality impacts assessment work that Audit Wales undertook on a national basis.
Thanks, Tom. A very clear summary of that. So thank you very much for that. Are there any questions on this paper at all? Okay, any comments? Okay, so I think we're just asked to do what Tom just highlighted there. So just we're there to review the progress to date, and also just consider any of the views and recommendations, as well as the removal of those ones that Tom just went through there. Can I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And a seconder.
Councillor Goodjohn seconded it as well, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Thanks for that, Tom. Item 11 then, the mid-year Audit Wales Work Programme update. Take us through that, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll be very brief. It's a biannual work programme update, and this is as at the 31st of December 2025. Just to say, in terms of the financial audit section, I think we've already received a comprehensive update from Mark and Gemma earlier in the committee. So we've completed our 24-25 work programme, and that has been summarised in the annual audit summary, which is one of the papers included here today. Then, in terms of our 25-26 work programme, that is underway. The recruitment and retention thematic review, that is at our reporting and clearance stage. And then just to say that both the scrutiny and housing adaptations reviews fieldwork has been scheduled for March-April. And that is with a view to completing our work programme by the end of June in 2026. So that's all I was going to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Samantha. Any questions on this one at all? Or any comments? So this is just for noting and for recommendation to refer to Cabinet. So I didn't have any questions on this one. So if we're happy to approve, can I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And a seconder.
Councillor Goodjohn has indicated he wishes to second it as well, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Noticing a trend here. And I'm also noticing that Gareth's going to be very cross with me with the amount of time this meeting's taken, but we think we have had some meaty subjects, so apologies for keeping everyone hanging around for this one. Item 12 then, the Governance and Audit Committee decision and action tracking. Anything to quickly mention on this one?
Thanks, Chair. It's just the regular report to committee in order to provide a record on the decisions made and actions requested in the exercise of its functions. A record of the outstanding formal decisions, resolutions made by the Governance and Audit Committee made during 24-25 municipal year is attached to Appendix A. And Appendix B is a record of outstanding decisions, resolutions for the current municipal year, and also includes informal actions raised by the committee members during meetings. In terms of those, just to note, Appendix A and B show a record of outstanding actions in the current states, green completed or amber ongoing. Appendix B is an update since the meeting was held last in December as well. In terms of recommendations, there's one recommendation for this, that the Governance and Audit Committee notes the contents of the report and makes any comments as appropriate. And that's all from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions on this report? Any comments? No, just I still think it's a really valuable log, so thank you for maintaining that and keeping it there. I think it's really useful. Thank you. So just for noting, but can I just have, are we happy with that report? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And a seconder.
Councillor Goodjohn has indicated he wishes to second from the chamber, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Okay, progress against the internal audit risk-based plan. Is this Andrew or Joan? Andrew, yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair. Evening, members. So this is one of the regular reports we bring to committee. So hopefully members will be familiar with its format. That's in relation to the performance of the audit team and the level of assurance that we give to you as a Governance and Audit Committee and to the senior leadership team within the organisation based on the opinions which we've issued as part of our audit process. So as at the 31st of December, which is the end of Q3, we covered 46% of our audit plan as agreed by Audit Committee, Governance and Audit Committee, which is not quite where we'd like to be because we set ourselves a target of 50% for Q3. But that said, the same time last year, we were at 44% and we went on to achieve 85% of the plan. And I'll come on to our progression in a moment, if I may, Chair. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to achieve our target of 80% by the end of Q4. In terms of the reports we've issued 24 final reports and 3 have gone out in draft. And members will note there's 19 reports that were out in progress as at the 31st of December. Based on the work that the data we've got at the end of January, then I'm pretty comfortable that we'll achieve 82%, at least 82% of the plan by the end of Q4. As at the 31st of December, Table 2 refers to the actual opinions we've issued, which are pretty positive, and that 92% are either substantial or reasonable, which hopefully will give you a good level of assurance across all service areas which we've audited. There are 2 limited assurance opinions, one of which we brought to committee's attention previously, which is the vehicle fuel management audit, and the second one is the corporate building compliance. That was at draft as at the end of Q3, but has now been finalised, so that information will be brought to committee's attention in June. We have a process in terms of identifying consecutive limited assurance supports, which committee should be familiar with now, and we're not in that situation at the moment. Appendix A is a list of all the reports we've got in our plan and the status of those, and we've incorporated an extra column to show you a date of when the final report was actually issued. Members will note that there were some jobs which were carried over from 24-25. Those are shown in Table 3, and we've completed 82% of those with 2 in progress as at the end of Q3. In terms of recommendations which we've issued within those reports, Then there's 134 recommendations in total, 5 high priority, 52 medium, 77 low. High and medium will be covered in the second report, which will be come to you this evening, Chair. So in terms of Appendix A, as I said, that sets out all the audit jobs. And to preempt a question which was raised previously, and what will we not be auditing by the end of the year? Anything that's blank and hasn't got a status in is potentially not all going to be covered. But this, just to remind members, this was at the 31st of December. We're pretty comfortable that most of those will be achieved. And if not, it'll go into the risk assessment for our audit plan for 26-27. And just to finish off, Chair, Appendix B is the status of all the 24-25 jobs that were carried forward into the 25-26 plan, just to give the members a flavour of what we've done and what we've achieved in terms of any carry forward. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions on this paper from members at all?
Chair, Councillor Goodjohn has indicated he wants to speak.
Just
Okay,
one,
Goodjohn.
just one you'll be glad to hear. So just on the hybrid council meetings and the review of scrutiny, just checking that's being collaborated with the review of scrutiny by Audit Wales. And could you just give us some details on how you're ensuring that you're not duplicating work?
Thank you for the question. That piece of work is now finished. So it was done separately to Audit Wales. We did two pieces, two separate audits. One was the hybrid working, and we used questionnaires, etc., from members to inform our findings. And the second piece of work was looking at the actual system. So that audit is recently finished as well, and that information can be brought back here if you need more detail.
So, sorry, Chair, if I can just, sorry, go for it.
Sorry, Jen, just to add to that, we did have a conversation with Audit Wales to make sure we avoided any duplication at the outset, Chair.
That's all I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions at all? Just one from me, Andrew, regarding the self-assessment against the new standards. I know it's a big piece of work. I've been through it myself. Just wondering, that's not currently on the programme. I appreciate that you're not quite where you wanted to be as per this on your plan, but I just wondered, is that going to be undertaken this year, or is that a potential risk area for looking forwards? And if it's a potential risk area, I suppose the question is, do we have any more informal perhaps processes around making sure that we're complying with at least the key parts of the new internal audit standards to make sure that we're getting the maximum value from internal audit, and also obviously you're protecting yourself and your team in relation to those standards? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The short answer is yes, we will be covering that in Q4. We've got one of our auditors on the case who's done the self-assessments previously, and she certainly challenges me to make sure we've got our ducks in a row. So that will be done in Q4 and reported accordingly, but will be included in our annual report, which will be presented to committee in June, Chair.
Great, thank you, and good luck with that. It's a big piece of work. I'm well aware of it, so all the best with that one. Look forward to seeing the results in the annual report. Any comments on this one if there's no more questions? No, if not, are we happy to approve, please?
Councillor Goodjohn is seconding, and obviously Councillor Hooper's had his hand up as well, Chair.
Hooper as well. Perfect, thank you. Okay, nearly there. Item 14 then, recommendation monitoring. Jo, is this you?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll try and be quick. This is a report that committee members are very familiar with. This is a report on the recommendations made and the status of the recommendations as at the 31st of December 2025. And Appendix A does provide the detail of all the high and medium priority recommendations. As members are aware, recommendations are made at the conclusion of an audit review if it is felt that improvements should be made to mitigate risk and strengthen controls. The implementation of these are monitored to ensure the identified risk has been addressed. So Table 1 sets out the categorisation that we use, but if I take you to Table 2 within the report, it summarises the recommendation status in respect of the audits completed from this year's audit plan. It illustrates that a total of 57 recommendations have been made as at the 31st of December, 29 have been implemented and 28 have a future target date. This consists of 2 high and 26 medium priority recommendations, and they are listed in Appendix A for you. Table 3 shows the recommendation status of audits completed prior to this financial year. The table shows that there is 1 medium priority recommendation made in a 24-25 audit which is overdue. Appendix B provides the detail of this recommendation, which was in respect of the libraries and digital equipment follow-up audit. However, since this report was prepared, it's pleasing to say that the recommendation has been implemented, an inventory has been provided, which is a live document, and assurance has been given that this will be maintained going forward. Table 3 also illustrates that a total of 19 recommendations have been made in previous year's audits that still have a future implementation date. Appendix C provides the details of the 1 high priority and 1 medium priority recommendation made in audits completed in 23-24, and also gives details of the 3 high priority recommendations made in 24-25. The current position column in Appendix C highlights that progress is being made to implement these by the agreed dates. Finally, all recommendations are regularly monitored, and these include the 14 medium priority recommendations from 24-25 audits that still have a future implementation date. If there were any undue delays, a report is taken regularly to the Council's strategic leadership team and ultimately to this committee. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Joan. Has anyone got any questions?
Yeah, Councillor Goodjohn's indicated you want to speak, Chair.
Sorry, just for speed, just to comment, can I ask that the Vice Chair liaise with the Chair and Internal Audit Services along with Democratic Services so that any significantly overdue recommendations we consider calling in the relevant officer responsible for them for our June meeting. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. I'll speak to the chair about that just to make sure that that is taken into account. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? One question from me, which is regarding one of the high priority recommendations from 24-25 with future dates in Appendix C regarding the ICT business continuity follow-up. That's one around a large investment in the backup solutions, which is due by 1st of June 2026. I assume that's a pretty major project that is ongoing. So I guess, are we happy that we're going to be, I know the report says that we're going to be hitting that, but just wanted a bit of verbal reassurance that that date is likely to be hit from what we know in the room. Was that Tom? Were you thinking about responding, but then deciding against it?
I pressed the button and it didn't come on quickly enough. Yes, we are. We're making good progress in relation to the move to the cloud-hosted environment, which will significantly improve our business continuity and failover readiness. So yeah, I'm comfortable that the 1st of June remains a good date to be targeting that for.
Great, thank you. It's got such big implications, and particularly around cybersecurity, but also all business continuity as well. So pleased to hear that. Okay, so noting the recommendation in the report, but also about the additional action for me to liaise with the chair, the head of internal audit and democratic services about asking people to attend for any recommendations that are overdue. Are we happy to approve this report? Thank you, Councillor Hooper.
Councillor Goodjohn has indicated he's seconding as well.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Thanks, Mark. And then I think last but not least then in terms of item 15, the forward work programme. Thank you, Joan.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So this is again a regular report on the forward work programme for 25-26 and 26-27. However, since this report was written, the next meeting scheduled for the 13th of April has been cancelled due to the pre-election period. Therefore, the proposed agenda items for that meeting shown in Appendix A will be rescheduled. Appendix B is a draft forward work programme for 26-27 for your information, but however, this will now also be adjusted in light of the cancellation of the April meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Any questions regarding this paper? Any comments? Okay, can we move to approval then, please? The two recommendations detailed on the paper. Thank you, Councillor Hooper.
Councillor Good-John's seconded as well from the chamber, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Thanks, Mark. Okay, there are no items which we've agreed as urgent, and no items that are to be included in a part 2. So thank you everyone for bearing with me through that meeting, and thank you everyone for your input. It's been a really valuable meeting. So thank you everyone, and I'm happy to draw the meeting to a close. Thank you.